know what you're thinking. You're waiting to see what I look like. But no, I'm not what you imagine. Even though I was born into one of the most singular roles a being could be given, feared by everyone, hated by everyone. Yes, I am death itself. Before you draw your own conclusions, listen, because before I tell you about a man who was betrayed, I have to tell you a story. My own story. I wasn't there at the beginning, when God opened his mouth and said, "Let there be light." I wasn't there when he separated the waters, when he formed the continents, when he breathed life into Adam's nostrils. I didn't exist. There was no need for me back then, because God's original intention didn't include me. He made man to live forever. Adam and Eve walked in a garden where I was only a word, a warning, a boundary they were never meant to cross. The Bible says, "In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." Genesis 2:17. A threat that should have stayed empty, but it didn't. The day Eve reached for the fruit, the exact moment her teeth touched the forbidden flesh, I was born. I wasn't created by God. I was begotten by sin. And if sin has a father, that father's name is Lucifer, which means I am, in a way, the offspring of a rebellion far older than the garden. The Book of Wisdom leaves no room for doubt. It was through the devil's envy that death entered the world. Paul confirms it. Through the sin of one man, death spread to all men. As it is written in the Bible in Romans 5:12. I'm not a child of God. I'm a child of sin. A grandchild of Lucifer, in a way. And since that garden, since that first interrupted breath of life, I have walked the earth. You picture me in a dark hood, with a scythe, with a face without eyes. That's what your fear invented to represent me. The truth is simpler and heavier. I have a form because I was made to be seen. John saw me, mounted on a horse the color of what is rotting, yellow-green, the color of decay, and in my hand a sword. Revelation 6:8. I'm not a shadow. I am presence. I walk the earth all the time. I'm in every room where the breathing falters in the middle of the night, on every battlefield. In every moment the flesh gives in to what was always inevitable. I don't only appear when I'm called. I'm already there, waiting for the moment that always comes. And it always comes. And I have something no other being in this universe has. The keys. The keys of death and Hades. They are mine. They've been mine since Eden, since the first man closed his eyes for the last time, and I opened the one door that has no return. No one passes without my consent. No one comes back without my decision. Patriarchs, prophets, kings, Adam, the first man made by the hands of God. I came for him. Abraham, the father of a whole nation. I came for him. Moses, who parted seas and spoke with God face to face. I came for him. David, the king who killed giants and wrote psalms that still echo through generations. I came for him. None resisted. None had a choice. The Bible also says, "Because there is no power greater than mine over the flesh, there is no boundary the human life can raise against me." Paul knew this when he wrote that, "I am the last enemy in," 1 Corinthians 15:26. The last, because I have not yet been defeated. But there was a moment, one single moment in all my existence, when I should have been warned. That moment is about a man named Lazarus. 4 days. For 4 days, he was in my domain, when I heard something I had never heard before. A voice from outside. A voice that did not ask, did not plead, did not bargain. It commanded, "Lazarus, come out." And I felt my keys turn without my touching them. I gave Lazarus back, not by choice, not by mercy, because before that voice, I had no option. I should have understood in that moment what stood before me, but I'm proud. I always was. How could I not be? I've never lost, never failed, never met anything I couldn't finally claim. So I filed Lazarus away as an anomaly, an exception that wouldn't be repeated. And I kept walking until I reached Jerusalem. Until the night, a man named Judas walked out into the dark with 30 pieces of silver in his pocket. And I was there, watching. And for the first time since Eden, since I was born from the sin of that garden, I felt something I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Hesitation. I held the keys of death that night, but something inside me whispered that I was about to lose them. I walked beside him, his hands tied, the soldiers in front, the torches cutting through the dark of the Jerusalem streets, the sound of hurried footsteps on stones that had already witnessed many nights, but none like that one. I walked beside him the way I walk beside everyone, but something was wrong. Wrong isn't the right word. I had never used that word to describe my presence in the world. I don't err. I appear, and what has to happen, happens. Since Eden, without fail, without hesitation. But that night, walking beside that man with his hands tied through the streets of Jerusalem, I felt something that had no name in my existence. A weakness. Not human weakness, not trembling knees, not a racing heart. A different kind of weakness. As if the presence of that man beside me created a distance between me and what I was. As if I were still me, but doubting my own existence. And then he spoke to a soldier. Just one word. Then. I shuddered, and I recognized that voice. It was the same voice that had said, "Lazarus, come out," and turned my keys without my touching them. The same voice that had stopped storms, that had fed 5,000 people with what fit in a child's basket, that spoke with an authority that came from no human, an authority no warrior ever had, greater than any king I had ever seated on the greatest thrones of mankind. That voice was now held inside a body with hands tied, being led by men who believed they had control of the situation. And I, who had never lost anything, who had come for Adam and Abraham and Moses and David without hesitating once, felt the keys in my hand tremble again. And from that moment, everything would change. But to understand what happened that night, you need to understand what happened before it. Let me take you back in the story. I had been in Jerusalem for days. Passover was approaching. The city was full. Pilgrims from every direction, the smell of lambs being slaughtered at the temple, the noise of crowds arriving with their stories and their burdens and their hopes that this year would be different from the ones before. Men always come to Passover with hope. It's one of the things I've watched for centuries and that never stops interesting me. The human capacity to keep hoping even after everything life has already shown. Even after everything I've already taken. But that Passover, something was different in the air. It wasn't only the feast, it was a tension, the kind of silence that exists in the seconds before lightning strikes, as if heaven and earth knew something men still had no vocabulary to name. There was a man at the center of all of it. Days earlier, I had seen him enter the city on a donkey, I watched the crowds laying cloaks on the ground, branches being waved, shouts of Hosanna, "Save us! Save us!" I went up to him, as I do with every living being. I draw near, I observe, I record. I walk beside every creature that breathes, because that's what I am. The presence no human can see, but every one of them carries. And he saw me. Not the way mortals feel me, with the chill on the back, with the dim premonition that comes when the body begins to signal its own end. He looked at me directly, with clarity, like someone looking at an appointment that's already set and already knows it. There was no fear in that look. There was something I had no vocabulary to recognize. I kept walking, because I always do. I had known Judas for 3 years. I had drawn near to him more than once, not to act, only to watch. Because there was something in Judas that was interesting in the way few human beings are interesting to me.
Most of the people I observe are simply living, making the small and large choices that eventually bring them to me, with no great inner drama. Judas was not like that. Judas was a man at war with himself, an intelligent man, more intelligent than most who followed that preacher from Nazareth. He saw patterns where others saw miracles. He saw strategy where others saw faith. He carried inside himself an ambition he had disguised as devotion, not in a calculated way, but in a genuinely sincere one. It is possible to believe deeply in something, and at the same time to want it to serve your own purposes without seeing the contradiction. Judas believed. That was real. But what he believed was not what stood before him. I saw the night in Bethany. A woman came in with a flask of pure nard, 300 denarii, a full year's wages, and poured it all over Jesus' feet without hesitation. I saw Judas rise. I saw the heat in his face, the indignation he called responsibility, and beneath the indignation, something older and more dangerous. I saw Jesus correct him in front of everyone, calmly, but without softening. "Leave her alone," Jesus said to Judas. "Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing." I saw Judas's face after those words, and I saw the moment something inside him decided, without his yet knowing he had decided. Like water seeping into a wall, slowly, silently, until the structure is already compromised before you realize it began. Days later, I followed Judas as he climbed the steps to the house of Caiaphas. There was a smell to that movement, not of calculated evil, not the kind I recognize in men who come to crime with cold blood. It was the smell of a man who had built a justification so convincing for himself that he could no longer tell the difference between what he wanted to do and what he believed was right. He told himself it was a plan, that he was forcing the situation so that Jesus would reveal his true power, that when they came to arrest Jesus, he would finally show the world what he was capable of doing. I have seen many men lie to themselves on their way to me. Rarely have I seen anyone believe so completely in his own lie. Then Caiaphas received him, as if he already knew Judas would come. Perhaps he did. 30 pieces of silver, the legal price of a slave in ancient Israel. It was written in the law of Moses. That was how they appraised the man who had raised Lazarus from the dead. And Judas accepted that appraisal. He left with the bag in his hands and tried to convince himself he had done the right thing. The city was quiet. The stars were there. And somewhere in that city, Jesus was sleeping without knowing. But he knew. Of course he knew. I was present in the room where they gathered for the supper. I was on the ceiling, in the walls, in the air between them, as I always am in every place where living beings gather. Passover was, among all the meals of the year, the one where my presence should have been most felt. It was the feast that celebrated a night when I had passed through Egypt, and the blood on the doorposts had kept me from entering and reaping the firstborn of each home. Ironic, the feast that commemorated my defeat, and I was sitting at the table. I watched him wash the disciples' feet, on his knees, the master washing a fisherman's feet. I saw Peter refuse to let Jesus wash his feet. His pride couldn't process that image. I saw Jesus say, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." I watched each face in that room, and I watched Judas. Judas was quiet. His eyes were down, carrying the weight of what he had planned moments before, the weight he still tried to call a plan, a strategy, a necessity. When Jesus said one of them would betray him, no one pointed at Judas. None of the others knew, but Jesus knew. And still Jesus went on. He broke the bread. He poured the wine. He looked at every face in that room with something I watched without being able to name. Then he said to Judas in a low voice, "What you are going to do quickly." Judas walked out of that place, and it was still night, and I went with him. The Garden of Gethsemane was a place I knew well. I had been there before, not to act, but because there was something about that ground that drew me and at the same time kept me at a distance. A boundary I could see but couldn't cross the way I crossed other places. As if the soil of that garden had something written on it I didn't fully understand. On the nights when Jesus came there to pray, there was a pressure in the air different from any other place I knew on the earth. That night, I arrived before Judas, and I found Jesus on his knees. It was not the posture of a defeated man. It was not the posture of someone who had lost and accepted defeat. It was the posture of a man in battle. A battle that was happening on a level I observed but did not fully command, in a language I only partly understood. And I heard Jesus praying and saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." He was sweating. The effort of that struggle was physical, written on the body, visible in the skin, real the way the truest inner battles are always real. And in that moment I understood something I didn't expect to understand. He knew. He was not being surprised by anything of that night. He knew every step Judas had taken. The coins, the agreed kiss, the soldiers coming down through the Kidron Valley with lit torches. He knew about the trial that would come. He knew about the cross that would come after. And he was choosing not to run. He was choosing to stay. I had never met this. In all my existence, since Eden, since the first man, since the generations that succeeded one another, and each one came to me by the only road that exists, I had never met a human being completely innocent who chose to stay when he could leave. Survival is the most fundamental instinct I know. It's what makes men run, fight, lie, betray, anything to avoid what I represent. It is what has moved every person who ever existed. Until that moment, where the rule of survival was broken before my eyes. This man was on his knees in a garden, knowing I was coming, and saying to God, "Not my will, but yours." My own steps slowed. It was the first time since Eden that my steps slowed. Jesus had left 3 disciples nearer the entrance of the garden. They fell asleep.
Jesus came back to them 3 times, and 3 times he found them sleeping. The 3rd time he only looked at them and said, "Sleep now and take your rest." There was a gentleness in that I couldn't fit into any structure I knew. A man about to be arrested, carrying the weight of everything that was coming, going back to check on his disciples. And then the torches appeared on the horizon. Judas arrived with the soldiers and the servants of the chief priests. He walked toward Jesus with the confidence of someone who knew every stone of that path. Because he did. He had been there many times. He had prayed on that same ground. He had slept under those same olive trees. He used that knowledge to hand over the man who had called him. And Jesus stood up. He didn't wait. He went to meet Judas, like someone who chooses the moment instead of letting the moment come to him. Then Jesus said, "Friend, do what you came to do." Friend. And I stood still. It is not possible that I stood still. I am constant motion, presence that walks, that advances, that does not retreat, that does not hesitate. Since Eden, I have never stood still. But in that moment, something in me locked. Because the word friend coming from that mouth, in that moment, to that man, was the most incomprehensible thing I had ever witnessed in all my existence. It was not naivete. Jesus knew exactly what Judas had done. He knew about the coins. He knew about the agreed kiss. He knew everything. And still he called him friend. I saw Judas give the kiss. I saw the soldiers advance. I saw Peter, impulsive, desperate, completely outside any rational calculation, draw his sword and cut off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. And then I saw Jesus stoop down, in the middle of his own arrest, with the soldiers around him, with his hands being tied. He stooped down and healed the ear of the man Peter had wounded. He healed the enemy. At the moment of his own capture, he healed the man who served those who came to take him.
I held the keys in my hand because it trembled every time I drew near that man. My keys are heavy, not the way you imagine, not the weight of metal. They are heavy the way only absolute power can be heavy. Since Eden, these keys have been mine. No one has touched them. No one has come close. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt as if they were not entirely mine, as if another hand were on them, not taking, not contesting, but present, simply present. I did not yield. I advanced, because that is what I am, inevitable, implacable, without alternative to what I have to do. But the hesitation was there. It was real, undeniable, new. While they led Jesus toward the palace of Caiaphas, I divided my attention, as I always do. I can hold a wide view of many places at once, one of the few advantages of being what I am. Part of me followed the group leading Jesus. Part of me stayed with Peter. Peter, who had promised to give his life, who had said at the supper with the conviction of someone who believes completely in what he is saying, "Even if all fall away, I never will." Peter, who had drawn his sword in the garden and cut a man's ear, the only act of defense among all the disciples. It was the same Peter. He ran, but not far. There is something in certain men that cannot fully walk away. It isn't courage, not in that moment. It's something more instinctive, more irrational. The kind of loyalty the body carries even when the head is already looking for the way out. Peter followed at a distance. He entered the courtyard of Caiaphas with the crowd. He sat near the fire in the middle, among the guards and the servants, as if that fire were his. as if that courtyard were his, as if he had every right in the world to be there. But he didn't. I know that gesture, hands held out to the flames. It's the gesture of someone trying to feel he belongs in a place where he does not belong. The warmth of the fire as a substitute for the warmth of something else that was lost that night. On the other side of those walls, only a few meters away, Jesus was being interrogated. And Peter sat near the fire pretending he didn't know him. The servant girl drew near. She looked at Peter. She narrowed her eyes and said, "You also were with that Jesus, the Galilean." Peter opened his mouth, and what came out was the smallest thing I had ever heard from a man who had been capable of much greater things. He said, "I do not know what you mean." It came out natural, with the same conviction with which he had said at the supper that he would give his life. Inside, and I was watching closely enough to see it, something was breaking, silently. Peter stood up. He moved closer to the way out so as not to draw attention, as if the physical distance from the place where he had denied could erase what he had said, as if the words could stay behind if he walked away fast enough. The second denial came with more force, a vow this time, with more people listening. Peter said, "I do not know the man." I thought, "You don't know that man? The man who washed your feet hours ago. The man who had pulled you from the bottom of the lake when you were sinking. The man who had said, 'You are Peter, the rock, and on this rock I will build my church.'" And then the third denial came with a curse on himself. 3 times, with intervals between them, with enough time between each one for him to have chosen differently in every moment. And then I heard the rooster crow, a single crow. It echoed even inside my domain. Then I knew that moment would carry weight in the whole story. The doors opened. Jesus passed through the doors, hands tied, being led from one place to another in the endless traffic of a trial whose verdict had been decided before it began. And in the middle of all that movement, of all that controlled chaos, he turned his face, and he looked at Peter. And I was there. I saw that look. And I swear to you, if I were capable of anything close to what humans call astonishment, that was something like what I felt in that moment. There was no accusation in that look, no punishment, no hurt, no cold look of one who would plan his revenge later, the way any human would. It was the same look he had when he called Judas friend in the garden.
The same pure look when he healed Malchus's ear in the middle of his own arrest. A pain that was not suffering for itself, that was suffering for the other. A man being led to be judged, hands tied, surrounded by soldiers, the cross waiting on the horizon, and the only feeling visible on his face was compassion for the man who had denied him 3 times. Then Peter ran out and wept bitterly. Judas, somewhere in the city, was walking with 30 useless coins in his hand, walking through the streets in the middle of the night, waiting for something that would not come. And I stood between the two, witness of the whole night, of every choice, of every failure, of every word that should not have been said. And it was in that moment that I felt something I had never felt before in this position of witness. A disturbance. Not the kind of disturbance that comes from uncertainty. I had never felt uncertainty. The kind of disturbance that comes from observing something that does not fit any structure you know. The kind of thing that shakes you not because it threatens, but because it reveals that you didn't understand as completely as you thought. There is one thing I have learned over the whole of my existence. The men who come to me come by different roads, some resisting, some accepting, some running, some waiting.
but they always come moved by the same fundamental force. What happens to them? The circumstance carries them, the illness, the battle, the wrong choice, the wrong moment, the body that gives in to time. None of them came to me carrying a burden that belonged to other people, and even less by their own choice. Jesus was coming to me not because of anything that had happened to him. He was coming because of something that was happening to the whole world. To a Judas who had lost himself in the difference between what he expected and what he found. To a Peter who had promised more than his human nature could sustain. To a whole humanity that since Eden had carried the weight of a separation that had not been the original intention. He was coming by choice, a choice I could fit into none of the categories I knew. And there was something else. I had already come for judges and kings and prophets, men God had used, men who had heard God's voice, men who had done extraordinary things. But none of them had healed at the moment of his own capture. None had called the man who handed him over friend. None had looked at the one who denied him 3 times, and the only feeling visible was compassion. These were not the acts of a man who was losing. These were the acts of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And that was what disturbed me most deeply, because I had never met anyone who came to me knowing completely what he was doing and choosing to keep coming anyway. Then, after all of this, I'm back to where our story began. Back to the streets of Jerusalem, back to that night, back to the moment I walk beside a man with his hands tied and feel something that has no name in my existence. The soldiers in front, the torches, the footsteps on ancient stones. That weakness is back. Clearer now, because I understand where it comes from. It is not weakness in the way humans know it. It is not the body giving in. It is not the will breaking. It is something different, as if the presence of that man beside me revealed a dimension my keys had never touched. As if there were a power at work that night that fit into none of the categories I knew. And then he speaks again. That voice. The same voice that said, "Lazarus, come out," and turned my keys without my touching them. The same voice that chose to stay in the garden when he could have left. The same voice that called the man who sold him for 30 coins, friend. That healed the enemy at the moment of his own arrest. That looked at the one who denied him 3 times, and the only feeling on his face was compassion. I walk beside him, and for the first time since I was born from the sin of that garden in Eden, since I came for Adam and Abraham and Moses and David and every human being who has breathed on this earth, I feel something I have never felt. The possibility that this time, what is coming, is not just one more delivery. The possibility that the man with his hands tied, walking to his own judgment by choice, is not coming to me, is going beyond me. I still have the keys. I am still inevitable. I am still implacable. I am still what I have always been since Eden. I am death. And yet, that night, walking beside him through the streets of Jerusalem, for the first time in my existence, I hesitated.
The Bible does not present death as a metaphor. It presents death as a being, with a name, with power, with delegated authority over a part of the earth, and with keys. The book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 18, records the declaration of the risen Christ himself about what he had taken. I am the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And I have the keys of death and Hades. That text, written decades after the resurrection, records the possession of the keys as an accomplished fact. But before they belonged to Christ, they belonged to another. Not just any key. In the ancient world, keys were not merely physical objects. They were symbols of jurisdiction. Whoever held the keys of a city controlled its gates. Whoever held the keys of a kingdom controlled access to the throne. Keys represented the authority to decide who enters, who leaves, who stays, and who is barred. Transferring keys from one to another was the most definitive act of power transfer that existed. The keys of death represented exactly that, only over a domain that no human king has ever ruled. Total authority over the realm of the dead. The power to open the one door that has no return. The power to decide who passes, and the absolute certainty that no one would come back without her permission, without her decision, without her opening that door from the inside. The book of Romans, chapter 5, verse 12, records the origin of that domain. Through one man, sin entered the world, and through sin, death, and so death came to all men. It was not a conquest. It was not a battle. It was a consequence. Since Eden, since Adam's sin produced death, and death produced its domain, those keys had belonged to her. They were hers simply because that was what she was, the inevitable consequence of a world that had chosen sin. Adam, Abraham, Moses, David, every prophet, every king, every child, every elder, no exception, no negotiation. Each one passed through that door when it opened, and none came back. Never. And then came the night of the betrayal. It was not the night when she acted. Jesus was still alive at that point. The cross had not yet happened. But it was the night when something inside her changed. The night when, for the first time since Eden, she walked toward her work and felt the keys grow less certain in her hand. Why? Because there had been one single precedent that should have been a warning. Lazarus. The book of John, chapter 11, verses 43 and 44, records the scene. And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped in a cloth. 4 days dead, not hours, 4 days, long enough for the body to be in decay, for those who loved him to have already closed their mourning, for any human hope of return to be completely impossible. He was in her domain, completely, definitively. And then a voice from outside, a voice that did not ask permission, did not negotiate, did not plead. A voice that simply said the name of a dead man and ordered him to come out. And the keys turned. Without her touching them, without her authorizing it, without her opening the door opened, and Lazarus walked out. It was the first time in her entire existence that this had happened. The first time someone from the outside had moved what was hers without asking permission, without power equal to hers, but with a power operating on a level her keys simply did not reach. She gave Lazarus back, not out of mercy, not by choice, because before that voice she had no option. She filed it away as an anomaly. She moved on. but the voice was the same. The same voice that belonged to the man who that night was led in chains through the streets of Jerusalem with his hands bound. The same man who, in the garden, on his knees, sweating, chose to stay knowing exactly what was coming. Who called friend the man who had handed him over? Who healed the ear of the enemy in the middle of his own arrest? In all her existence, death had come for beings carried by circumstance, illness, battle, the body giving in to time. None had come to her by deliberate, free, conscious choice of every detail of what was coming. That man was walking toward her by choice, and this was something she did not know how to classify. The night ended with Jesus arrested, with Judas carrying a remorse he had nowhere to set down, with Peter in the ashes of a fire that had gone out, and with death walking the streets of Jerusalem with the keys in her hand, but less certain than ever that she would keep holding them. What did that man carry that her keys could not hold? Death is perhaps the most honest character in this whole story. She does not lie. She does not promise what she cannot deliver. She has no hidden motive. She simply is and does what she has always done, with a consistency no human being can imitate. And still, before that man, she hesitated. There is something profoundly relevant in this for anyone who has faced something that seemed inevitable, something that seemed to have no way out. A situation, a loss, a diagnosis, a breakup, the kind of thing that arrives with the same certainty death arrived with at Gethsemane that night. The story does not say the inevitable doesn't exist. It says something different. It says there is a force that operates on a level the inevitable does not reach. That there is a power that moves what seems unmovable, without asking permission, without negotiating, without pleading. Death felt this that night. She felt the keys grow less certain in her hand. Not because she lost power, but because she met something that operated beyond the reach of her power. And if the most absolute force that exists hesitated before that man, it may be worth asking what that man can do for what seems inevitable in your life. And death still did not have the answer to that question. She had to exist. She had to have power. She had to have the keys, for losing them to mean anything. Because a God who defeats a weak enemy defeats nothing. Death had to be real, had to be absolute, had to be the door of no return that no one had ever walked back through. So that when she was defeated, that defeat would change what it means to be human. And that night, for the first time in every generation of history, death walked the streets of Jerusalem knowing something was about to happen to her, and not yet knowing what. In 2 days, she would be called to the strangest assignment of her entire existence. She would go for a man on a cross, and what happened when she arrived there is the next chapter of this story.
The betrayal happened. The cross was set. On the day of the crucifixion, there was a man nailed beside Jesus with only hours left to live. And he used the last second to make his final choice.